In this video, I will go over my design notes on this insert I made for KNARR. I've went through multiple iterations and had a ton to compromise on, namely due to the box size being as compact as it was. I'll start with the older iteration, talk about what things I needed to adjust, and then we'll cover what changes were implemented in the new. So the red card tray is very basic, nothing fancy going on here. It does all it is needed to do, that is to contain the cards and be able to be slid out from the side. Assuming the cards are shuffled beforehand, you could technically put this whole thing out onto the table and say this is ready to go. This tray does make up one half of what we'll call the upper level of the insert. This serves to cover the loose pieces underneath to prevent spillage. With the other cards, I had thought to arrange them in this staggered fashion for numerous reasons. 1. They span wide enough to use up the rest of the space on the upper level. This covers the loose components from spillage. 2. They provide visibility of all 3 types of cards. And 3. You could pull each card out as required when replenishing during the game. With all that said, there were some flaws I found in doing things this way. 1. Picking up this tray is cumbersome. I'm grabbing one end of the thick wall, which is fine, but on the other side, I can't exactly grab a hold of one of the dividers that easily. I find myself having to grip onto the second stack of cards to pick up this tray, and that doesn't feel like a well executed idea. 2. Height-wise, there's not a lot of room to work with here. With the player boards underneath, the game board on top, as well as the fact I needed to accommodate room to space apart the 3 decks and build in dividers, there was almost no room to fit all of this in here. I actually had to remove the sleeves off the cards to make this work. So if you're wondering if this design could accommodate sleeves, it cannot. And 3, another point on the height issue, I couldn't create a divider to cover the top side of the green deck, so this whole thing looks awkward. The player boards are sitting flush to the bottom surface, which sounds normal, sounds perfectly normal, but had this box been a little bigger, I would have liked to include some kind of surface to make it easier to get your finger underneath to pick this up more easily. But alas, I had to settle with just a finger slot. It does the job, but because the board is now lifted out at an angle, the hooked ends sometimes catch onto the sidewall. It's a bit of a minor nuisance at most. And moving on to the biggest selling point of this design, the thing I'm most proud of, the individual player trays. The game originally came with a cardboard insert where all the small bits were tossed into the middle section. There shouldn't have been any spillage because the game board was actually covering that on top. I mean, it works, but it doesn't sort the pieces though. So the idea here is that the player just takes the tray with all their pieces, they just turn it over, pouring everything out, and they just set up with that. They take the tray and return it to the box. That's it. Nice and simple. And also, when the game's done, all you got to do is give this little tray back to the person. They fill up all their pieces back into the tray, and then they can just give that back to you to put back into the box. As for the funky looking divider that separates the trays and the player boards, I don't see a reason why something like this would ever need to be taken out of the box. So to me, that it made sense for this to stay in the box permanently. And that's why I've chosen to keep the player boards and the trays on the bottom level. Moving on to the latest revision. I took out the staggered tray and repositioned the slots to be in line with each other. These 2 prongs sticking out serves to ensure this piece cannot shift around in the box. While the cards can shift, they aren't moving enough to become disorganized. You can see that it does expose the bottom area, which goes against what I'm trying to accomplish. But I haven't had any pieces spill yet, so we should be good here. With this extra gap now, it means I can actually grip onto something to lift this tray as opposed to grabbing onto the cards to take the tray out. Due to 3D printing constraints, I had to slice up this tray into 2 pieces to avoid drooping filament or dealing with support beams. Designing an insert like this has forced me to look into locking mechanisms, like a plastic buckle clip. except it's a one-time install, meaning once it clips in, you can't unclip it. The most important part of this video was to document this installation. Let's see how it goes. In the world of 3D printing, if you ever try to print something like a bridge, you need some way for your print to support the middle arch, or you risk filament sagging in between at the middle there during the printing process. Now with the holes I've made here, I had worried that if it had sagged, I wouldn't have been able to push these clips into place because that gap would have been too small. What I did to compensate was to increase the size of the hole to account for any drooping filament. But in hindsight, with how small of a hole it was, there was practically no drooping filament at all. Anyway, what this ends up translating into is this shifting bit that you see here. The holes were taller than the size of the clip, allowing for a degree of play. But I suppose I can run some super glue to make a quick fix for now. You'll also see that with the red card tray, I've widened one of the sidewalls to allow room for a notch. This notch forms the gap needed to get your finger in to pick up this entire tray out of the box more easily. As for the bottom insert, there wasn't a major revision as I've pretty much figured out this part. The only problem I had with this was that the gap tolerance was too tight for the player trays. Everything was sized down a bit to allow for a larger tolerance, allowing the tray to be put back in place more effortlessly. And for the final part of this video, we will do a time lapse to see how long it took me to set up a 4-player game on my own. And based off this video, it took me about 2 minutes and 40 seconds to complete. Other than that, that's it for this design. If you're interested in grabbing a copy of this insert yourself, links are in the description below. I'll be posting other designs I've completed once the videos and the photos are taken. If you like what I'm doing, follow me to stay up to date with future projects I have on board. I will be open to commissions on designing inserts for a game that you own, if you too want some way to start your games quicker. Leave a comment on which games you would like to see an insert of.